All right, good morning, everyone. Thanks for being able to come to our class today. Today is our seventh session on climate justice, care for God's creation. And today we'll have a special guest speaker, Dr. Cynthia Moe Lavetta. Let me actually turn the next page before I keep talking. So she's a professor of theological and social ethics at Pacific Lutheran Theological Seminary, Church Divinity School of the Pacific, and the Graduate Theological Union in the Berkeley, where she's a member of the Core Doctoral Faculty. I sent everybody a full-blown version of her biography, so I won't really repeat myself too much here because we're also pressing for time. So. So Dr. Cynthia, if you could, I'll stop sharing and I'll make you the spotlight as well.
Thank you. Thank you. I really want to thank Marco for his really careful and astute and gracious organizing of this. It's been really a pleasure to work with him, and also I'd like to thank Rick Rouse for his initial invitation to be a part of this. I am just thrilled that your congregation is doing this 7-part series on the climate crisis. I don't know of another congregation that is giving it that much attention in one fell swoop like that. So just really good for you. As I understand it, you have already covered some tremendously important territory. You've looked at the biblical witness to the goodness of God's creation and its inherent worth. You've looked at a reality most important to me, and that is that climate change is most deadly and devastating for impoverished people here in the US and around the world, how it is a threat multiplier, and you've looked at some steps that Christians can take. So I wanted to begin by asking briefly what questions you have for me. And then I will see if I need to make a sharp pivot from what I plan to do. Can you toss out questions that are in your mind?
Jim, I think you just had one. Want to repeat that question?
Yeah. I would like to know what resources about what is being done by businesses, by different organizations that points out the gains and the potential gains that they are busy with, so that we can support those, so that we, in that way, it is somewhat active on our part. Maybe with our money for investment or whatever, or what we buy. But it gets it a little bit more personal, and it lets us know what's happening. Also, what are the really dangerous parts, like the Brazilian jungles that are being burned? That's a huge source of oxygen. And look at the carbon that's going up.
Yep. Okay, those are two really, really good questions. And I will try to send some sources of information that I get on a regular basis. But secondly, I really affirm attentiveness to what our money is doing, how we spend it and how we invest it, and how is it creating more carbon emissions, or how is it mitigating against. So that involves everything from the companies we spend our money with to where we invest. So many faith-based organizations around the world have made pledges to take their investments out of the fossil fuel industry. So the Lutheran World Federation has made that commitment. Many universities have. The issue of how we use our money matters. Is our money contributing to climate change more or not? So yes, that would be a beautiful ongoing project for your congregation, to have a task force set up to look at ways that people can buy or not buy and invest and bank in ways that work against climate change. Yeah. it's yes. So we need to get more resources to you. And also, I just want to say that's a good move to make. I consider that economic advocacy, and it's one finger of the 10 fingers of action toward climate justice. Other big questions in people's minds.
Yeah, one of the biggest questions actually started on our first session. Politics is always a hot button topic. So the question is, how do we really, do we just keep sending emails to our congressmen or congress ladies and people to say stop? Climate change is important. How do we bring that to forefront?
Okay, so let me do that question. That is a vitally important question because public policy matters. And as Lutherans, we're to be involved in public policy. Luther wrote 1,000 letters to public officials about issues, particularly issues that affected poor people. So that's and I will try to, in part 4 of my comments, I'll try to address that question.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Kind of on the political deal, this war has come up. It's going to escalate the use of petroleum hugely, and that is affecting the carbon. The price, it's going to be a challenge for people to want to make money off of petroleum now because the price is going so high. And so we need to look at what that does and balance what's happening with the war and the demand for petroleum to control things or whatever,
Okay, so that's not a question, but that's a really important comment that points to the weaving together of so many parts of our lives. So militarization indeed is a vast contributor to the use of petroleum and therefore to carbon emissions. So that's another reason to be present to demilitarization efforts. But you also raise the idea of people making a profit off of the situation and specifically off of petroleum. So one of the things I'll talk about at the end of my talk is change in, well, let me come back to that. Let me come back to that, James, at the end about change in worldview and what we accept as normal and natural. Excellent. I am torn. I'm going to move on. But I'm also torn because it would be rich at this point just to spend the rest of the hour in discussion of the kinds of matters you've brought up and the other matters that are on your minds, because I know there are many and there are sophisticated understandings that we could probe further. But I did agree to give a time. So I'll do that. And then I'll hope that there's time at the end for further discussion. Here's what I've planned: to first give some theological foundations for why responding to climate change with a climate justice lens is at the heart of what it means to be the church, what it means to be a follower of Jesus, what it means to be a Lutheran in our time. Secondly, to build on what you have already done regarding climate change as a poverty issue. And third, look at a framework for climate faith or climate discipleship. And that's where I'd like to get into the questions that James and Marco raised moments ago. And then fourth, to very, very briefly give you some sense of what we're doing at PLTS through our new Center for Climate Justice and Faith. So let's move into the first of those. Some theological foundations. Our moment in time is pivotal. One climate expert from South Africa has declared this: The next few years are probably the most important in human history. End quote. We, the adults and young adults alive at this time, we will determine whether humankind avoids the worst of climate disaster or not. So again, the climate expert from South Africa, the next few years are probably the most important in human history, end quote. What a responsibility and a privilege to be alive now. Therefore, what we do, what each of us does, matters. Each of us has a key role to play. The Church of Christ has a role to play. In fact, never before has the world so needed the church to be the church. What do I mean? Let's return for a moment to the beginning, the foundations of all that is, the heart of Luther's life-giving discovery. And I start here for two reasons. One is because I believe that what I'm going to say about the foundations of it all is, I believe, the heart of why it means so much to deal with climate change as people who confess Jesus. But also because facing climate change requires truth-telling about some truly tormenting realities. Lutheranism, by the way, is, from the beginning, is bound to truth-telling. Facing these tormenting realities is, in my experience, made possible by a basic faith claim, and that is this: the gracious love of God made flesh in, but not only in, a dark-skinned Palestinian Jew named Jesus on this roving planetary speck called Earth. That love surpasses any force in heaven or earth. This love for each of us personally and for Earth's entire web of life will not dim, regardless of what we do or do not do. So let that promise flood over you. Let it fill every cell, every bone of your being. For this we know, neither life nor death, nor things present, nor the future, nor any powers, nor anything else in all creation will be able to separate us from the love of God.
I just quoted the verse.
End quote. This breathtaking claim of Christian faith is the bedrock of my words with you this morning. From that starting point flow yet more truths, and you know them. Let them sink into your bones and your spirit. First, this God is at play in the world, breathing life into it. This Spirit is present among and within and beyond us, is saving, is healing, is liberating. Next, we, human creatures, are created and called to recognize God's healing and liberating love, to receive it, to relish it, and most important from a Lutheran perspective, to trust it. And finally, after receiving and trusting this love, we are to embody it in the world by loving self and neighbor and world as God loves. To love what God loves. We are beckoned to join with God's spirit of justice-seeking, earth-relishing love in its steadfast commitment to gain fullness of life for all. According to Luther, that is our vocation. That is our life's work. To receive and trust God's gracious love and then live it in the world, into the world. It is an astounding moment in history to make these deeply biblical and deeply Lutheran claims and to be people of this God. With that foundation laid, we can face haunting truths. And here we build on what you began to grapple with in your second session, climate change as a poverty issue, or I would say as a justice issue. And this moves us into the second part of my comments. Some of my understandings of climate change are rooted in my experience as a missionary decades ago in Central America, and more recently worked in India and with people of Africa. I was invited to India to work with the Council of Churches of Northern India and a group of about 40 seminaries on developing a climate justice curriculum. It was to be required in 40 seminaries. This is 10 years ago. An eco-justice curriculum. By the way, when I got to the retreat center where we were to work, another group was just leaving and they looked tired but accomplished. And I asked what they were doing. They were the leaders of Sunday school throughout Northern India, and they had just developed an eco-justice curriculum for Sunday schools in all of Northern India. Again, 10 years ago, my friends. That's because because the realities of climate change are so devastating in that part of the world. Through them, I came to see the horrors of climate injustice, not just climate change. That is, the consequences of climate change are not suffered equally by the world's people, nor are the world's people equally responsible. And this is what to me is the haunting truth. Those least responsible for Earth's climate crisis are suffering and dying first and foremost from it. And conversely, we of the high-consuming world who have benefited most from the industrialization and the high-consumptive lifestyles of the wealthy world are most able to protect ourselves from the worst of the devastation. That's the core of climate injustice. And we could spend all of our time now plowing into the implications and the layers of what that is all about. But that's why I talk about climate change and climate injustice, because frequently people work on the concept of climate change without recognizing climate injustice. And that means we can come up with solutions that actually are more damaging to people already vulnerable. So again, we can talk more about that if we like. But this is the leaders of the church in India taught me very gently to re-see climate change as climate colonialism. I'll quote to you one of an executive in the church, in the Council of Churches in Northern India. He declared, I quote, "Climate change is caused by the colonization of the atmospheric commons. The powerful nations and the powerful within them have emitted and continue to emit greenhouse gases beyond the capacity of the planet to withstand. However, the communities with almost zero carbon footprint bear the brunt of the consequences," end quote. Within the US too, as you well know, economically marginalized people who are also disproportionately people of color are the most vulnerable to the extreme storms and fires and respiratory illness and food and housing insecurity that is brought on by climate change. So in short, the climate crisis reinforces the injustices that neighbor love calls us to dismantle. That's the bind that we're in. Who causes climate change in relationship to who dies from it is a foremost theological issue, an issue of our faith lives for a people sent by God to proclaim God's saving love for the world and to love neighbor as self. This is something that we are called to face. Now, in that context, what is a framework for faithful response? And that is moving us to part 3 of my comments with you. A framework for climate faith or climate discipleship. I'd like to share with you a two-part framework. The first part is what we will call a Lutheran theological anthropology, essentially an understanding of who we are, who we believe human beings are matters. Faithful response to climate injustice is made possible by recalling and practicing who we are. From Luther, I have learned that human beings are three things at once. We are beloved, we are broken by sin, and we are body of God's justice-seeking, earth-relishing love. It's paradoxical, no? To be both broken by sin and beloved, to be both broken by sin and body of God's love. So let's look at those three. First and foremost, and forever, we are beloved. Nothing can change that. So, even acknowledging our role in devastation and suffering beyond imagining due to climate change, we are still beloved by God. For me, that knowledge opens the door to accepting the role that my way of life and my society play in the climate crisis. I believe that's a role that we long to flee from acknowledging. I long to flee from acknowledging it. Secondly, we must acknowledge that we are broken by sin. And in this case, not only individual sin, but collective or social, structural sin. In this case, the sin of climate injustice. It was first declared publicly by the Patriarch Bartholomew, the bishop, the head of the Eastern Orthodox Church worldwide, was the first person to declare, I think about 20 years ago, that sins against creation are the devastation of creation's ecosystems are actually sin, are collective sin. Thirdly, while this is true, we are at the same time body of Christ's love on earth. That means that we can, and indeed we are destined to participate. This blows my mind, to participate with God in God's work of healing and liberating, saving from all that gets in the way of abundant life for all. So, when I first realized that in the affirmation of baptism, the affirmation of baptism that we do, for instance, at confirmation, and the pastor says, there are some ordained people on this screen, the pastor says, do you, to the whole people, the congregation, do you intend to live in the covenant that God made with you in holy baptism? Okay, so God, how many of you are baptized? Okay, so God, we claim that God made a covenant with you, that you would, and then that the pastor goes on to read 5 things. And the last one is, do you remember what the last one is? Does anyone remember? Okay, the last one is, this is the covenant that God made with you when you were baptized, that you will seek justice and peace in all the earth. Does that blow your mind? Essentially, we're claiming that God promises you that you will do that. So the question I would raise is, in the context of climate change, what does it mean for us as baptized people of this God to seek justice and peace in all the earth? If that's not a calling to the church, yeah, I'm really not sure what is. But it is, to me, it is an astounding promise that this is the covenant God made with us, and that the Spirit of the living God is breathed into us, that the living Christ lives within us. And that is not a passive, love in Christian traditions, love as a biblical and theological norm is not just a good feeling. It's not primarily kindness or even feeling good towards someone or affection. Love is a very active, steadfast commitment to the well-being of the other. And that includes where systems are messing up the other, damaging the other, or that means seeking to dismantle them. So love is a profoundly active and challenging and blessed calling that often is domesticated into thinking it means somehow being nice or sweet or only affectionate feeling. That's not the case with love as a biblical norm. So what my point is here, that remembering that we are beloved, meaning therefore we can face what we've been doing on earth. Secondly, that yes, indeed, we are broken by sin, including the sin of climate change. And third, that we are called to be and are the body of this power. As one of my rabbi friends refers to God, the transformative power of the universe living within us. That moral anthropology or understanding of who we are and living into that is one piece of a framework for faithful response to climate change. The second piece of this two-part framework is to think about and live into change necessary on three levels of our social existence. And one of those levels is behavioral change, lifestyle change in households and institutions. A second level is social structural change, and we'll talk about that. And a third level is change in worldview, consciousness. One thing I have found is that people often tend to get bound into thinking that change on one of those levels is what we need, and sort of ignore the interplay of change on the other three levels. The film series that you saw emphasizes the first level, change in how we live as households and as institutions, that is churches, universities. As you know, this means all kinds of measures to reduce carbon footprint, and they're vitally important. Can you just toss out, to put some flesh on that, some of the ways that you've learned or probably are practicing already in households and in your church or other institutions to reduce carbon footprint? This first level of change, behavioral.
We eat plant-based meals
Okay.
because the livestock industry is a huge emitter of CO2.
Okay, so that is a huge move and an excellent example of what I mean by lifestyle change. The move to in individual, and see the paradox of this is you're not going to change climate change just by your household eating plant-based. But the paradox is it's absolutely necessary that you and other folks make those lifestyle changes. It's the beautiful paradox of individual change. It's absolutely necessary, even though, and you might say, well, it doesn't matter. I mean, people say it all the time. It doesn't matter what I eat. That's not going to change the world. It doesn't matter if I give up plastics. That's not going to change the world. But the point is, it's vitally important. If people don't do that, then things won't change. So beautiful example, beautiful example. And we'll talk in a minute about how that is also linked to structural change. Another example of lifestyle or behavioral change.
I think one thing that's come out is the change to get away from plastic bags, but it's not carried far enough. Someone pointed out in prior weeks that look at all the packaging in the store that's in plastic. That's all petroleum based. And petroleum isn't just gasoline and oil. It's also all the plastics and everything. And that's all released. And then those have made the plastic oceans,
Mhm.
which is
Yep.
killing off life in the oceans, which is
Okay.
going to affect us.
That's another, you two have brought up beautiful examples. So the decision to vastly reduce plastics in our daily life, plastic bags and single-use plastics and plastic containers for carrying food, and to reduce is crucial. And there are the movements worldwide, and the revelation of the way in which the development of the plastic industry, so much in everyday life in the U.S., was actually fueled and initiated by the petroleum industry. All of this information is available online. So that's two examples of lifestyle change, behavioral change. That leads us to look at the second level of change, social structural change. So, I have students who say, all we need is everyone to change their lifestyle. Structural change just takes too long. And then other students will say, wait a minute, it's not gonna work to have everyone just change their lifestyle. We need change in social structures. The point is we need both, and they interface. So when I say social structural change, I mean a number of things. One of them is public policy. So nothing is more important than public policy on local and state and national and international levels. Structural change also means change in economic and financial structures and business. That's what you brought up earlier, James, in the beginning of our conversation. Social structural change also means change in agricultural practices and policies. Just what you were alluding to, Mark, in your comments. Is that Mark who talked about the ag industry? Yeah. So the links between behavioral, what I want to say is that attending to structural change can be less appealing because it's harder and more long-term. But I would argue that our addressing of climate justice needs to be on both of those levels. Give me an example. I'd like everyone to think of some examples of where public policy, that is laws, are vitally important in the struggle against climate change. And they can be state, local, or federal.
How about an oil pipeline from Alaska to the United States? The policy that refuted that, and I think Canada have put a squash on it, or together. So isn't that national policy that put that pipeline under wraps?
So that's an excellent example of public policy on the national level, where pipelines are allowed or where drilling is allowed, drilling in the Arctic, etc. Very, very, very good example.
Yeah, on to that note as well is like what's going on in Pennsylvania with fracking. It's doing so much more damage than good.
Okay, great. And public policy around fracking, another good example on a state level in that case, yes. Give me any examples on local levels.
They finally decided not to allow you to go to the grocery store and come out with 10 little plastic bags full of groceries because they don't want to put too much in them, because if they recycle the bag gets weaker and the groceries fall out. So they decided everybody needs to bring your own bag or start paying for paper bags if they're going to give them to you at like 8 or 10 cents a piece. But then I went to the grocery store the other day and I didn't have quite enough of my own bags. I've lived in Europe, so I'm used to having your own bag and taking it to the car and putting it in a container in the car. And I thought they finally are getting to that here. And I went to the store the other day and I guess I should have brought one more bag from the car with me. So she whips out a plastic bag and I said, where did the plastic bag come from? I thought those were gone. She said, well, this is what they gave us this week to use. And I thought they're not following what has been passed as a local law, that there aren't supposed to be any plastic bags.
Okay, that's a beautiful example too. That local law about plastic bags, think how significant that is in terms of plastic reduction. And public policy isn't perfect. It doesn't get kept. It doesn't do all that we need to do. So the perfect can't be an enemy of the good. But you make a very, very good example of local public policy. We have in the ELCA a full-time staff person in Washington, D.C., dedicated to environmental matters and corporate social responsibility. Her name is Ruth Ivory Moore, Ivory-Moore. So your congregation could establish a task force or a commitment to public policy advocacy regarding climate change and climate justice. And you could contact Ruth Ivory Moore to get on her mailing list. You could contact FAN, the Faith Action Network in Washington State, that used to be our Lutheran Office of Governmental Affairs in Washington State, and ask what are they doing around climate, and get on those mailing lists. Public policy advocacy is a necessary dimension of climate discipleship. And I want to note the link between, and so let's also look at structural change in terms of business and agriculture, or agriculture and other business. Look at the movement within some businesses to vastly reduce carbon emissions. Very, very significant. Also significant is the move on the part of some businesses to look like they're reducing, but not be reducing. So these are things that are really important to look at. So I can go into a Starbucks and see, okay, so they have fair trade coffee that you have as your option, and that is more climate sensitive coffee growth. But at the same time, that looks good. But at the same time, look at the massive quantities of paper and plastic that are produced by that Starbucks every single day, with the straws and the lids and the cups. So it's important to look with a critical eye at what business is doing, but look at when steps are being taken and support those businesses. Now, what you said about eating plant-based food, the other dimension of another dimension of structural change regarding agriculture is eating locally and regionally. So what a wild absurdity that the average bite of food in our country comes like, 1,000 miles, 10,000 miles from far away. The prime example that seems real to me is in our own state, Washington, that we would produce apples and then export them to Chile and import apples from Chile. So what's the carbon footprint of one apple that comes from Chile? It's huge. So to decide through lifestyle practices to eat locally, to the extent possible, and then through public policy to encourage. So what is public policy that could help to shift the global agricultural world from being vastly international to being more local? What is one kind of public policy?
The carbon tax.
Okay, a carbon tax on a very, very good, excellent. Other examples? It's
How about subsidies to farmers,
okay.
depending on who you're subsidizing and who you're not subsidizing?
Okay, subsidizing local farmers. What a move that is. Think of all the people that would have local agriculture if they could make a living at it. So excellent. Or you make me think of another one, Evie, with that comment. What about the public policy that has made in some school districts, has mandated that a certain percentage of the school lunches come from local agriculture? They call it, in fact, I believe, Earth Ministry, in your base there in Seattle, and that's a organization you want to connect with, Earth Ministry. I believe they were behind some of the public policy in the Seattle school district called, I think it's called Farm to School. So yes, you could decide to be really engaged in public policy that encourages local agriculture, and see the link there between that and lifestyle. Because the lifestyle practice to eat locally is to give business to local farmers. So there's a link between what we do with lifestyle and what we do with public policy. Okay, so I'm conscious of time. I just want to hold up for you the action on the lifestyle or behavior level, action on the social structural level, and then third is action on the level of worldview or consciousness. Now, what do I mean by that? This includes theology. It includes what is our vision of the possible future. One of you noted how much you appreciated Catherine Hayhoe's film. I think you appreciate it partly because she's giving a vision of sustainable Earth-human relations, of a future in which humankind lives sustainably in relationship to our planet. So what we assume to be normal or natural is a part of worldview. One of the things that I do in my class is I ask students to put a boilerplate question in their mind. And the question is, what, in any circumstance, what is presupposed to be natural or normal or inevitable or even God's will that is not? It's actually just a human construct. And we assume to be natural or normal many visions or ways of life that in fact are deadly in terms of the climate. So getting a sense of our consciousness, our worldview, what would be an example? Do you want to throw out any examples of that? Assumptions that we hold.
You could go back. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. You could go back, say, 40, 50 years, something like that. And there was a big scare about acid rain developed by the way we heated our houses, burning wood. And it didn't affect locally so much in here on the West Coast, but as the winds go across the nation and then into Europe and so on, that acid rain hit on the East Coast and even more so over in Europe, caused by what was happening here in America. Today, we're getting stuff from China, from petroleum and coal that's coming into here. And that's affecting the whole climate. So.
So the assumption of kind of the normalcy of being able to heat homes in ways that create that kind of environmental disaster. Very, very good. Another example that came to my mind as you were saying that was our assumption of the normalcy of driving of cars, of cities full of cars. Has anyone been to Amsterdam? Okay, there, what do you see? You see a city like it's full of bikes, absolutely full. It's amazing. It blows your mind. So what is assumed to be normal about driving cars through our cities is not necessarily normal. And it's public policy and lifestyle change that would change that. It's public policy that can make riding bikes safe rather than dangerous in our cities. So that's just an example. Or what about the assumption, the normalizing of maximizing profit as though that is a good? Profit is one thing, but maximizing profit? Luther railed vociferously against maximizing profit because it damaged poor people. So the ongoing, someone brought up the ongoing fracking or the digging for oil in the name of maximizing profit. A worldview change would be to call into question maximizing profit if it means exploiting people or exploiting the earth. We could call that into question. I was in Norway giving some lectures some years ago, and I was talking about economic justice. And one man stood up in the audience and he said, Dr. Moe-Lobeda, things are getting bad in Norway too. Do you want to know now The average the average CEO makes 14 times what the lowest paid worker makes. 14 times. He was outraged. Okay, I was in the United States, it's 450 times. So to his worldview, it was outrageous that the average high paid and low paid was 15 times more. In our assumption, it's normal for people to maximize profit to the extent that someone can earn 450 times what the lowest paid worker earns with disregard for the environmental impact. So disregard for the environmental impact of business, if business is maximizing profit, that's a worldview issue. So what I'm saying is that the stories we live by, the worldview, the assumptions we live by are deeply important to look at and assess. Do we want those stories? Do we want those worldviews? I think another dimension of worldview, of consciousness for me, is learning to live with paradox. To me, it's been vitally important to accept the paradox of both despair and hope, because the facts of the matter around climate change lead to despair, and we are not to run away from those facts. It may be too late, but while living with that, we can at the same time hold and cling to and live into hope that is stronger than the despair. To me, it's important not to run from, and I think it's important not to run from the despair, in part because we see how much climate despair is infiltrating and shaping the lives of young people. The numbers of young people committing suicide out of climate despair, the numbers of young people who think there is no future. We need to face the fact that climate despair is real. But facing the fact that it's real can mean we live in despair. And the paradox that to me is vitally important is no. We can acknowledge that despair and hope at the same time. My hope outlives and outweighs my despair. My hope is grounded in the promise of God that life in God will surpass and embrace us all, and is more powerful than any other force in heaven or earth. That's what the resurrection means, in part, to me, that promise. So we have a claim of hope that outweighs anything. Even if climate change wipes out our species, we're in the embrace and the love of God. So what I'm trying to say to you is that it's not only changing our behaviors and work towards changing social structures, it's also the gift of change in our worldviews and consciousness, how we understand what life is to be about, what constitutes the good life. So what I suggest to you is that as a congregation, you go forward with a framework that says, let us move in all three of those levels of change. That's the kind of part three of what I want to say to you, that framework for change on three levels. Now, I also wanted to very briefly tell you some of what we're doing at your seminary on the West Coast, and that is Pacific Lutheran Theological Seminary. We've taken it very seriously that leaders in the church need to be prepared to live in this world, the world of climate catastrophe. The question being, do we mitigate the worst of it or not? But leaders of the church need to be able to lead people in struggles for climate justice and mitigating climate change, and lead people to live with hope and faith in the midst of it all. So we have established a center for climate justice and faith. And I thought that I would quickly show you, very quickly, some about that center. We think of it as a tree with programmatic branches. And I'll show you those branches. The roots of the tree are powerful. One of the roots is the gospel of God's love for this world, surpassing all else and living within us. And the other root is the faithful, reforming, truth-telling, spirit-led, daring spirit of Lutheranism at its best. I think that I'll screen share with you for a minute. Can you see this little slide here?
Yes.
You can. So this is the tree representing our Center for Climate Justice and Faith. You can see the beautiful fruits. Those are the people that are impacted by its programs. The water down here, the sustaining water, is the individuals and congregations who support the center. We have a circle of watering congregations, and that is congregations that agree to pray for and support the center, and if possible, send people to participate in our programs. The programs, oops, I can't make the slide move. Why is that? Huh. There we go, whoops. The first of the programs is a certificate in climate justice and faith, and that is a certificate that is a 9-month program. It's open to people from around the globe. In our first inaugural year, we had twice as many applicants as we could take, and they are from Nigeria and Kenya and Costa Rica and Tanzania and Mexico and Indonesia and the United States, and they are composed of rostered leaders as well as lay leaders. The second program is a course in community organizing for climate justice and faith. And that is a 15-week course that teaches the arts of community organizing and then does mentored support. In our first cohort, we have a bishop, we have pastors, we have scientists, we have students, we have a number of people. Those are both programs that are open, for instance, to you in your congregation. We have a concentration in climate justice and faith for our MDiv students and MA students, and it can be done totally through our distance learning or our residential learning. We are certified as a Green Justice Seminary. That was a 3-year rigorous process that impacted our curriculum, our infrastructure, our community, our worship, and our engagement in the broader community. We have curricular innovations. We have made a commitment to prepare people for ministry at the intersection of race, class, gender, and earth. And then we have various public programs that we co-sponsor, seminars, webinars, things like that. And then the newest branch of the program was 3 leaders of the Latino communities in the ELCA and the LW Lutheran World Federation asked if we would develop a certificate in Spanish. So we are in the process of the beginning stages of developing a certificate in climate justice and faith in Spanish for Latin America and Latinx USA. And we're doing that in collaboration with the Lutheran World Federation and ELCA World 100. So that is, in a quick little snapshot. That's a picture of what we're doing at PLTS. So I need to close. And I want to close by reminding you that in these times, the call to embrace God's love and to live it into the world is a call to the church to throw ourselves into the worldwide movement to mitigate climate change, and especially to attend to the needs of those who are most vulnerable to the devastation by climate change, the most vulnerable in God's family. This means it is a profound gift, responsibility, and blessing to be the church. in this part of the 21st century. I thank you, your congregation, for your hunger to step up to the plate and for doing so.
Thank you so much, Cynthia. We really do appreciate it. And I know you have to leave out, but one final thing, I ask you if you could lead us out in prayer. We do that every class, and so, but you've been such an influence on what we've been saying, so I appreciate it.
I'd be happy to. I'd be happy to. Yes. God be with you.
And also with you.
Oh, God of life and light, God of mercy and presence, we give thanks to you for your calling to us to embody love in this world. We give thanks to you for your presence with us. We give thanks to you for filling us and flowing amongst us. We give thanks to you for the beauty of your creation. Help us, good God, to be your people. Help us to breathe in your love and live it into the world. Give this congregation, give our Savior's Lutheran vision. Give them courage. Give them tenacity and fortitude. Give them hope and joy. Let them be a force in this world to forge ways of living, of shaping our society that let earth flourish and protect people. Bless them in your calling to them. And now we ask for your healing hand on every person in this room, for your healing hand on all whom we love, who may be suffering, and for your healing hand in our own lives. We give thanks that we live in your embrace. Amen.
Amen. Thank you so much, Cynthia. Let me remove the spotlight real quick.
Thank you all. Thank you all so very much for what you are seeking to do and what you are doing. I'm grateful.
Thank you again.
Now I'll go and pack my bags and be off to the inauguration.
Yep.
Keep up your good work.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thanks, guys.